Hopefully it's been an amazing day so far. I'm going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes on this. I think we have a bit of time for questions as well. I'm going to talk quite fast, because there's a lot here. So, 15 to 20 minutes on top technology trends. And this is really an internal look. The things we think are important, the things I think are important. Important note here, we sort of talk about technology as the next wave. And if you're a company, a brand or a company like ours, the next wave can either lift you up or it can wash over you and can wash you away. So it's very important to be hyper aware of what's happening out there. Quick introduction for anybody taking pictures. Take a picture of this picture, please. This is my new PR picture, freshly photoshopped. I love it. I'm the founder of MediaMonks, live in LA and Mexico City, so to spend my time between both of those. Chief Operating Officer, so a very operational role, but very focused on our creative output as well. I'll do a really quick introduction of our company. Here we go. We founded it back in Amsterdam in 2001. We built it out to a global creative production partner. 11 offices, 10 countries, 850 people, and I think we do some of the best work out there. Exciting news as well. In July, I think it was, July 9th, July 10th, we joined S4, which is Sir Martin Sorrell's new foundational platform for the industry. So that gives us a lot of new opportunities to do interesting and cool stuff. Before we get into this, I'm going to do a quick minute or so of MediaMonks work so you get a sense of what we do. I'm not going to show you the whole reel because we have to keep it going. I think we have some sound with this. I'm not that good with technology. That's the irony, of course.
You feel that? Power.
You get the drift, lots of shiny things. This, I think, is the most important question we ask ourselves, and it's about relevance. The question we ask ourselves every single day is, are we relevant now, and will we be relevant X amount of time from now? And I think the defining component to today is the X is getting shorter. We used to be able to plan ahead 2 years, sometimes even 3 years. Often when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to our technology roadmap, it's down to 6 to 9 months. And that, I think, is a really key component to what we're seeing and something I'll be talking about across 3 areas. I'm going to talk about something that's happening right now that I think needs to get a bit more attention. I'll talk about trends that are nearly there. We're seeing some of it bubble up, but I'll give you a bit more context on how we think about these things. And I'll talk about what's next. So that's real future state stuff where I think we'll see some really interesting things happen over the next year and a half or so. Before we get into that, a lens for trends. I think our industry tends to jump after everything that is cool. So we use the following to sort of get a sense if something is actually worth investing time, money, effort, and all of these things in. We talk about a technology and platform needs a certain level of maturity, needs to be stable, needs to have a level of functionality that makes it interesting. It needs to meet an actual user behavior. People need to instinctively want to use this technology or platform. And there needs to be a way to scale it up through distribution, ideally. So this is a lens we'll come back to once or twice, really valuable for us when we think about our roadmap. So what's happening now? First things first, I think we live in the age of experience and ecosystem. So we had the age of mobile, age of social, age of the microsite and campaigns. Nowadays, I think it's all about offering the perfect experience across all of the touch points within an ecosystem. That means you need to own a lot of these platforms now because you need to know your clients, you need to know your customers, and it's all about combining these two things. I think it resonates really well in what I think is one of the most underrated trends happening today, which is that I think more and more, the experience that people have with a brand actually trump more traditional marketing concepts like brand love. And that doesn't mean brand love doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't mean loyalty to a brand doesn't exist anymore. I just think there's a completely different expectation that users have nowadays when they actually interact with a brand or a product. And it's based on something that was said back in 2012. I think it was very forward-facing for its time. The interface is the brand, which was coined by Nike and AKQA when they did Nike Plus, which sort of I think, distributed how we think about a product company in a digital space. And the real takeaway here is that I think it's very real and honest to today's marketing landscape. So much of the interaction people have with products, services, brands happens via digital screens now. So the experience people have with that actually starts defining the brand perception in a much bigger way than it used to be. And this is one of my favorite cases to sort of explain this. So Uber sort of semi-exists in Moscow. Yes. I took the Yannick's taxi earlier. It was good. Shout out to our sponsor. So Uber, Yandex? Okay, thank you. Good tip. So an important takeaway is Uber has had one of the worst reputational years and a half that you could imagine. And there is a lovely other sort of millennial brand on the US market called Lyft. Who here has heard of Lyft? Okay, so Lyft is very friendly, very millennial ready. And they have the same drivers that bring you to the same location for the same amount of money. It's literally the same service. And we're all told millennials are purpose-driven. They want to follow brands and services that reflect their want for purpose in life. If you actually look at that, and I've done this a lot in the US, and you ask a group of millennials who here has Uber on their phone, 9 times out of 10 people will say, I have Uber on my phone. And then you ask them, do you want to delete it? And most people say yes, but they don't. And that's because they're locked in to the ecosystem Uber has created, and the experience Uber has is marginally better than the one Lyft has. So it's overriding personal preference through user experience, through digital design. And this isn't new thinking. This is the CEO of IBM back in the 70s. Good design is good business. We know this instinctively, but I think now that we can, define that the interface more and more is the brand, this is more important than ever. I like Google as an example here. This is Douglas Bauman, famous UX design lead, who worked at Google in the 2008, 2009, 2010 area. And he actually left Google, wrote a huge blog post about it, and he said, I cannot work for these guys anymore. Every design decision I make, if it's 3 pixels, 4 pixels, 5 pixels, needs to be supported by data. I'm over it. So that was about 8 years ago. This is Google now. And in my mind, Google is probably the defining company when it comes to digital design, user experience. They've completely redefined how we think about mobile. And they're not doing this because it's fun. They're not doing this because it's cool. That's not how Google thinks. They're doing this because it's good for their business. It locks people into their services. It locks people into their ecosystem, which is why they're now so focused on digital design and user experience. So this idea of brand experience trumping brand love, I think, is reflected in the steps you see from the likes of Google, from the likes of Apple, and more from the likes of Amazon. So some trend takes here. What we're seeing across the globe is roles like Chief Design Officer, Chief Experience Officer, sort of populate across the region. From IBM to Nordstrom, those roles are becoming really important. More and more, we're talking about consumer experience instead of your user experience. So this is really about how do we see all of those touch points work together for a cohesive experience across the ecosystem. I think the experience beating brand preference is probably the scariest part of this, and Amazon is an amazing example. Amazon is wiping away decades of marketing activity. by owning a sales platform that people really enjoy using. They're the #1 seller online of batteries in the world with their own brand, wiping away 50 years of Duracell marketing and advertising, all because of ecosystem and experience. And I think the thing we really need to talk about is something I like to call digital dopamine. Everybody that's on their phone right now is hooked. You're addicted to your phone. And the reason for that is these types of things. Visual stimuli that keep you refreshing, keep you updating, keep opening your apps because you like these things, you want these things. And in many cases, it actually overrides your personal preference. So good or bad, it's important to understand that this is happening and it's hugely powerful. And we tell a lot of our clients to actually focus on these things and think about them in a cohesive way. So that's what's happening now. And it's a thing we focus on a lot. I want to talk about something that's near, and we're seeing some of it already. We actually saw quite a bit of it during judging as well, including some really interesting work. It's the world of realities, virtual, augmented, and mixed reality. And I think it's really interesting to use the trend lens when we talk about this landscape. We have some very famous people with big budgets say things like the following. Mark Zuckerberg, VR is the next great computing platform. Tim Cook from Apple, I regard AR as a big idea like the smartphone. I don't think there's any sector or industry that will be untouched by AR. And these are companies that are driving pretty much the landscape for all of us. We will be buying and using their products and services for years to come. So this is where the lens comes into play. Virtual reality, we got into it a few years ago. There was so much hype and buzz behind it. But let's look at it, really look at it, using the lens. So this, to me, is the #1 problem when it comes to VR. This gets published every 6 months or so, the VR industry landscape, and it's a mess. It's completely fragmented. I can remember being at CES earlier this year, in Las Vegas, 150 different VR companies, all pushing their software, their platform, their product. It makes for a completely fragmented landscape. Gartner Hype Cycle, published last year. They had virtual reality on the slope of enlightenment, which means it's almost at a level of technological maturity that we can start using it. At that same time, Facebook was closing down hundreds of Oculus pop-ups around the US. Because they would go unused. People literally were not interested in testing or trying VR headsets. So you have a user behavior problem on top of a technology problem. Which to me means if you start looking at virtual reality through a lens of trends, there is a lack of maturity on platforming technology. I think it's a mess. But more importantly, there's no real active native user behavior. There's no real interest from people to do this at scale. Which comes to distribution, there isn't actually a scalable distribution model for it. If I have great content, it's very difficult for me to get it to people at scale. Let's look at the other side of the equation, because a lot of people talk about VR and AR in the same breath. Before we do that quickly, there are use cases for VR. I actually think games, events, business-to-business training can be really powerful. We saw a few examples of that during judging. But more interestingly, let's look at augmented, same lens. First things first, much less fragmentation. It's being driven by Apple, it's being driven by Google, Facebook, Snapchat, 4 big companies, maybe 3 depending on what Snapchat does over the next few years. Lots of rumors they might be selling to Amazon, but it's being driven by these big companies that actually have a very consistent view on what AR is and what it needs to be. Most important thing, native user behavior. This was very early AR, but when Snapchat launched these lenses, people went crazy for them. They love them still to this day. One of the highest engagement rates you'll get on advertising is on these type of interactive lenses. And then, I say this is the weirdest thing that happened in the US in 2016, but I think we all know one thing happened in the US that was slightly weirder that year. But this is 3 o'clock in the morning, in New York, in Central Park, because a new secret Pokemon could be found. Good or bad, this is user behavior. This is people hungry for the experience of using augmented reality. So that's really exciting. And then you come to distribution. Snapchat and Facebook are actually teaching people to love the QR code again, which is great. Somebody had to do it. And then we have AR Core, AR Kit, which means everybody's relatively new iPhone or Android phone actually has great AR capabilities at a much higher level than I was expecting only about a year and a half ago. So same trend lens for AR. Technology platform, surprisingly mature. Most important thing, user behavior off the charts. People love this, they use it even when the technology wasn't quite there. And distribution is getting there. It's not quite there yet, but it's happening quickly. So from our perspective, if we have to make choices, we're going for AR, where VR is fun to do as a production company, but I don't think hugely powerful to invest in if you're a brand or a business at this moment. Then we come to mixed reality. This is the sort of original future state where people are interacting with the real world with headsets, using hands in motion. Purely from a technology perspective, at least 3 years away to do it well, potentially even 5, maybe even 7. But I think there's a bigger problem with this, and we'll come to that in a moment. So quickly, trend takes, augmented reality is here. Snapchat, also known as the dancing hot dog company, actually introduced it, and they did it really well. But it's also being used. Amazon has AR products within their app. You can place the product before you buy it. There's some real world business opportunities when it comes to AR right at this very moment. I think this is something that is underappreciated, and we'll see a huge shift happening in this space over the next 2 years, which is the camera as a new browser. So instead of thinking of your camera only as a way to take pictures and video, more and more it will be a way to make sense of the world and pull in data as you're looking at things via the lens of your camera. Very similar to how you type in information into your browser to get data. You'll be using the camera on your phone in a very similar manner. Interesting move because it's a locked ecosystem. What does it mean for advertising? What does it mean for being able to get your content to be searchable and findable? So there's, I think, a threat to this for brands as well, but it's definitely where everybody is pushing. And then the big question is technology on your face a scalable user behavior? These people look really happy. They don't look very cool, though. And that's always going to be a problem. So for me, I think this, from a technology perspective, is at least 3 to 5 years away. I actually wonder if it's a user behavior that will scale anywhere in the next 10 to 15 years. Which brings us to the last focus point that we have when we think about our roadmap, which is what's next. And there's a lot of stuff that's happening next. I think the biggest question is, when is the wait for AI over? And I think part of the answer is maybe now, but we're not really using it in the right way, because it's already really, really powerful. So that doesn't mean robots are taking over, not yet. Even though Elon Musk disagrees, we're still safe for at least another few years. But there was so much focus in the hype cycle, in the buzzword sort of marketing side of things, that VR was getting all of the attention while AI/machine learning actually gave us a lot of value that I think we're underusing immensely. And when I try and explain it to people, and especially our customers, I talk about it in 3 really specific ways. Machine learning/AI, some semantics about what to use there, means a brand has eyes now. You can see things, you can make context out of visual information. And in the 18 years we've been in business, the amount of visual information we've gotten from consumers via Facebook, VK-contacten, Instagram, Snapchat, without being able to give actual context, this is mind-blowing that it's now possible, and possible at this level of quality. Same goes for ears. Your brand has ears now. You can listen to people, you can create context, there's a level of empathy you can build into how you respond. This is an amazing thing to think about. If you think about how this can scale up, eyes and ears for brands for the first time ever. And then there's also something that's a bit more esoteric, which is you can train your own talent. And everybody here will say we're in a talent-driven industry. The idea that you can train a machine to be something very specific for your company or industry, I think is something that goes very underappreciated. And I'm going to use the most LA example I could find to explain what this means. So this is Henry Cavill, very handsome man who plays Superman, but he also plays in the latest Mission Impossible. And he grew a mustache for Mission Impossible and then had to reshoot his role as Superman, and he shot the Superman role with a mustache. And he couldn't shave. So the studio had to shave him in every scene. And they did that with post-production, heavy manual labor. So to the left, we see the heavy manual labor version. A post-production company got millions of dollars to do this scene by scene. To the right is a machine that was taught to shave Henry, just by input of data. And he's just a guy who thought it was hilarious that that happened, who wrote a talent, a machine learning talent, to shave Henry in every situation, which I think we can all agree is the most important thing that has ever happened in digital, is this moment. But as you can see, the quality, I would say actually the quality to the right, having seen a lot of examples, is probably better. And it was automated, and it was very cheap. So there's a whole new wave of things we can do with this technology if we start thinking about it in a different way. Okay, so trend takes machine learning will impact all industries. It's already impacting pretty much every app you use on your phone. The amount of data you put in gets pushed through machine learning algorithms to give you specific output. So you're already being controlled by machines in a way. But I think there's a really interesting problem here that people don't really talk about, which is I'm less scared of the Skynet model where robots take over. I think there's actually a huge black box of issues with this type of coding. Because if something breaks in normal code, you can go to a line and you can fix the line. If you code with machine learning and AI algorithms, the machine creates its own code to a point, and you can't actually fix it that easily. So a lot of what we're seeing now in the US, for instance, with Facebook, where there's a lot of focus on fake news, it's very difficult for them to fix, because it's based on years and years and years of code optimization through machine learning algorithms. So it's not just fixing a fake news is off button somewhere. It's a huge problem, and we'll see this more and more as more companies start using this. And I think it could actually create some really scary items. If you have some time, check out the case at the bottom, Tay.ai. This was a bot on Twitter launched by Microsoft about 2.5 years ago. Within 48 hours, it was a horrible racist, because people fed it with the wrong input, and Microsoft couldn't fix it, so they had to take it offline. So that's something to start thinking about. So,
Wesley, 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Before we end it, the X, the time you have, it will keep getting shorter. 5 big foundational shifts that are happening soon. 5G, your phone will be able to download full HD movies in 10 seconds. Huge shift, huge change in how we think about content distribution. There's going to be the next billion users on digital. Billion people that have never used the internet or digital channels before will hit within the next 1.5 years from India, Indonesia, and Mexico. Amazon as an ad platform went from 3% last year to 8% of ad buy in the US this year to expected 20% next year. Hugely different player in that market. Chinese tech giants, very interesting for this market because there's a lot of relationship building between Russia and China. Companies that are pretty much locked in to win the AI machine learning race by 2021, mostly Chinese companies, will have a huge influence on how we interact with each other and the world around us. And then, because it's an innovation presentation, you're not allowed to not mention blockchain. So yes, blockchain. Who here invested in Bitcoin? Nice. This is where I tell you don't take my trends too seriously, because I did not. You should be up on stage next time. But this is very much an example of something getting a lot of buzz, a lot of attention. I think when you use the lens, maybe not as mature as it needs to be. And that is the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Wesley. Great presentation, great animation. Now questions, please. Пожалуйста, вопросы. Можно задавать на русском, можно на английском, пожалуйста. А где у нас девушка с микрофоном? А вот.
Hello, it's about what do you think about combination of 460 production and VR.
So my problem with it is that 360 production is still quite expensive. And this is my biggest issue with it when I think about native user behavior.
Because I want VR with real people.
Yeah. Well, it's going to get there, but even then, how many times did you look all the way around in this today? How many times did that happen? It's a technology that I don't think has an actual ask, because this is all you need generally in real life. So yes, there are people pushing for it, but I think a lot of the funding will die down over the next few years because of the lack of adoption. So it might get stuck, and then we'll have to wait another decade for it to fire back up.
Thank you. Еще вопросы есть? Пожалуйста.
How do you think these new technologies may show up in fashion industry anytime soon? If you can think of trends there, like maybe AR, AI, or...
So I think AR is sort of we're already seeing it happen with magic mirrors in shopping locations where you can do fittings without actually having to go fit the clothes. It's not quite where it needs to be. I think it becomes more interesting when you start thinking about algorithmic matches of outfits based on your preferences. We actually saw a case that we judged a few days back that had a very early version of that. So I think it'll be more about matching personal preference with some of your favorite brands and proactively giving you opportunities to buy outfits and that type of thing. That's where I think a lot of it will go. So not the sexiest part of the business, but more functional.
Okay. Okay, Wesley, thank you very much once again.